All right, Bellwork question number 3. What do you already know about Andrew Jackson? You know something about him because we have already talked about him this year. So you know at least something about him. But Chase, what's one thing you know about him? He is on money. Specifically, he's on not the 10, the $20 bill. Lincoln's on the 5. Hamilton's on the 10. He wasn't a president. Benjamin Franklin is on the 100, and he wasn't a president either. Thomas Jefferson. They don't print $2 bills anymore, do they? No. Yeah, I have some. My dad, for some reason, my dad was obsessed with $2 bills, so I have like 10 of them. And I'm like, sweet. He's like, I got these for you when you were little, and I'm like, sweet. I don't know. $2. What else do we know about Andrew Jackson? Braden? Okay, yeah, that's true. He was the first president that anyone ever tried to assassinate. Whoops. That's a fun story. He was at the funeral of like a congressman, and this guy came up and like tapped him on the shoulder and like pulled a gun and tried to shoot him, and the gun jammed. And like, not that Andrew Jackson knew like karate or anything like that, but he was like, please, right? And he's like, get away from me, right? Kind of thing. And the guy pulls another gun, and that gun also jams. Wow. Yeah. And that guy, the guy that tried to kill him, spent the rest of his life in a mental facility. So there's that. Yeah. So yeah, that's a fun story about Andrew Jackson. Catherine?
Wait, so what year was he inaugurated?
1829.
So they had mental facilities then?
They did. Mm-hmm. Well, it didn't take well, yeah, yes, they did. Depending on where you were, not everywhere, certain places. Etta.
Didn't he do something with the Native Americans?
He did do something with the Native Americans. We'll talk about that in module or in lesson 2, but he was responsible for the Trail of Tears. If you've ever heard of that, that's probably what you were thinking of. Or in the Indian Removal Act. Maybe you've heard of those things. Probably the Trail of Tears more than the Indian Removal Act. What else do we know about him? He was a general. He fought in what war that we've talked about?
New Orleans.
At the Battle of New Orleans in the War of 1812. Yeah. Oh, fun fact, did you know, well, and Rick and I were talking about this as he came in, that Harriet Tubman's going to go on the $20 bill. Did I steal your thunder, Brandon? I'm sorry. But, and I can't remember, maybe someone knows this or you can look it up. I can't remember if they're replacing him or putting her on the other side. I'm not quite sure, but someone can look that up and let me know. Morgan said he was the 7th president. He was the 7th president. Someone last class said he was the 20th president. Not that far. 7th. Braden?
He was a prisoner of war of the Revolutionary War.
How old was he in the Revolutionary War?
No idea.
Are we sure? Did you look it up? I don't. We'd have to look up when he was born. I don't know about that one. Because he would have been pretty young, I think. But I don't know. Look it up. Let me know. 13? All right. Makes sense. Catherine?
I just looked it up about the
Yeah.
Said it's going to take up to 2030 to get it all printed and everything.
Okay, yeah, so it's going to be a while before she's on it, but is she replacing Andrew Jackson?
I'm pretty sure because this is what the bill looks like.
That's okay. No, I've seen it. Yeah, but I couldn't remember if they're replacing him or not. Etta?
Yeah, they're replacing him on the front with her, but on the back, they'll be like in the White House.
Oh, okay. I felt like there was something crazy. So she'll be on the front and he'll be like in the White House on the back for those of you at home. So, which I think, it's a little ironic. I guess we can double check with Miss Rutland if this is ironic or not, but I'm going to say it anyway. Andrew Jackson, historically, really racist, super racist. So I think it's a little ironic that like a Black woman also is going to replace him on the front of it. I'm not like super feminist, but I'm also like girl power where it like fits, right? So I think it's pretty awesome that it's like that she's an African-American woman that's replacing him on the front. Anyway, super racist. You can probably figure out how I feel about Andrew Jackson now. So, all right, anything else? Good. So this module 12, is pretty much about Andrew Jackson and his role in our government, kind of what he did, how he did it, just different things that he was involved in and his impact. So we'll start with before he was president. We'll go into when he was president and things that happened, and then we'll see what happened also after he was president, because even after he was president, he still made an impact. Sorry about my little typo there, but module 12, lesson 1, we'll look at how campaigning in the United States changed in the 1820s. We'll continue our discussion of states' rights versus federal rights, who should have more power and what they should have power over. And we'll see how both domestic and international conflicts impacted decisions that were made by the federal government under what historians call the period of Jacksonian democracy. Okay, so in OneNote, your notes are there. You should be there. If not, get there quick. All right, so kind of picking up where we left off in module 11, looking at the more political side of things, we were looking really economically what was happening in the country in the early 1800s. Politically, there was a lot of drama. This part's super interesting to me of this year, of this class that you take this year, because we do get into some drama, right? Some tea when it comes to politics in the United States, and things kind of shift a little bit and look a little more modern. They look a lot more like what we see in politics today as well. Between 1818 and 1824, our Democratic Republican Party, right, one of our first political parties, they were the dominant party. Even though they had held the office of president for a while, the members of the party really were not united on most things, right? If you were from different regions, you had different views on things. We know that there were different decisions made by the government that caused sectionalism. So really, depending on where you lived, depended on how you felt about decisions made. So that's a big reason why the members weren't united in that party. Members in specifically the election of 1824, voters were split on 4 different candidates. All of these candidates were from the same party. We're all from the Democratic Republican Party. And remember, we're still in the time period where you run for president. And if you come in first, you're president. If you come in second, you're what? Vice president. All right. So that's still the case here. These are your 4 candidates, all from the Democratic Republicans: William H. Crawford, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, John Quincy Adams. Andrew Jackson and Henry Clay have a big role in this election. All right. They play the biggest role in this election. And then John Quincy Adams is also mixed in there as well. John Quincy Adams, he was the son of President John Adams, right? And I think at this point, you might have to look it up. Somebody look it up for me real quick. I think 1824 is the year that John Adams died. It could be 1824 or 1826, somewhere 26? That's what I thought. Okay. So, anyway, John Adams, fun fact, died on July 4th. No. Someone else died on July 4th too. Thomas Jefferson. Did Thomas Jefferson die on July 4th as well? I think he did. They died within like hours of each other. Yeah. Fun fact. That is ironic, right? Well, I don't know. That might not be.
That's just a bummer.
Yeah, that might just stink, like what Miss Rutland said. I think that's coincidence. I think if you ask Miss Rutland, she'd be like, that's not ironic. And she'd probably say it just like that, right? We love Miss Rutland. We give her a hard time. All right, so here are your 4 candidates. William H. Crawford, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, remember him? Right, Missouri Compromise, American System guy, right? And then John Quincy Adams. Who? It might just be the coloring of that particular picture that I got off the internet. That's a painting. These are all paintings. Yeah. Okay, so in the election of 1824, Andrew Jackson wins the popular vote. But as far as the electoral votes are concerned, Jackson gets the plurality. What does that mean, the plurality of the vote? Do you have a comment, or do you tell me what okay, hold on. What do I mean by the plurality of the vote? Brayden, what do I mean? Right, so Jackson got the most electoral votes, but he didn't get the majority. Right, you have to get the majority of the electoral votes in order to become president. If that doesn't happen, the House of Representatives chooses the president, right? Prior to 1824, it happened one other time. Do we remember? This is when Miss Campbell was with you.
That dude that shot Aaron Burr.
Okay, what election?
1800.
1800. I said it was before 1824. Right, okay. What's your fun fact, Will?
I'm actually related to Andrew Jackson.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool to chase
Very
to
related to Will Crawford as well.
No, I'm not.
to William H. Crawford. What's your middle name? Oh,
Claudia?
not it. No,
That's what I heard.
no. Well, you heard wrong. All right. So the election of 1824, nobody wins the majority of the votes. Jackson gets the most, but not the majority. So the House of Representatives has to vote. Does anybody remember what Henry Clay's job was? What? Speaker of the House. What's interesting is in the election of 1824, the House of Representatives gets to vote on who the president is. Anybody see anything fishy that could go on? Right? We see maybe a potential problem, potential issues, okay? Could be issues, right? Well, there was. Surprise, surprise. Okay, well, here's what your electoral votes look like. Again, nobody wins the majority, but Jackson gets the most electoral votes and he gets the most unpopular vote as well. But you have to win the majority of the electoral votes. 270 today, that's our magic number. I don't really know what the magic number was then, right? But today our magic number is 270 to get the majority. Did anybody in 2020, when you were like watching the results and kind of waiting for everything to come in, think that nobody was going to get to 270? Did it cross your mind, or did you like really not care that much? Right. It crossed my mind. I was like, my husband was like, what if nobody gets to 270? I was like, then the House of Representatives gets to vote. And the last time it happened was 1824. So it would have been crazy just to be alive and that happened. But
would it be the current House of Representatives or the just elected House of Representatives?
the one that was currently in place, not the newly elected ones. Yeah.
Who had the House?
When
right now,
the Democrats did.
Okay, so Biden would win.
Maybe each state gets a vote, so There's no telling, right? And the reason there's no telling is because wrong one. It's because what happens in with this is Henry Clay's the Speaker of the House, right? And he can influence, or he might not have an influence on what happens. So, but there's definitely like talks and things that go on before the vote, right? So we don't really know. Probably, I would guess probably, but who knows, right? All right, so Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, he tells John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay drops out. Y'all saw this, right? He basically like was not going to win. Henry Clay runs for president a lot and like never wins. Right? Yeah. He just I don't know. He just don't y'all be nice. Right? Be nice. But he never wins, but he's still involved in politics for like ever. Right? So Henry Clay's like, I drop out, right? I concede. I'm not going to win. I'm giving up. But he does tell John Quincy Adams, hey, because really it's between Jackson and Adams. He says, I'll influence the House to vote for you because it's my job, right? I'm Speaker of the House. I do what I want, essentially, kind of. But he's like, I'll use my influence in the House to defeat Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was like the new guy in town. He was known for his military service and things like that. But as far as politics went, he was very new to that. And so people liked him a lot. And we'll talk about that why in a second. But as far as like politicians in the federal government, he was new. And so people were not the biggest fans of him. So that's kind of why Henry Clay was like, hey, I'll help you defeat Jackson. I personally also think that Henry Clay felt threatened by Jackson's popularity. That's just me, though. And then John Quincy Adams, obviously, he comes from a historical family, right? A very influential family. So Henry Clay's like, hey, let's get you the office of president. Henry Clay is able to do that. So Adams is voted in as president by the House of Representatives. And once he becomes president, he names Henry Clay as his Secretary of State. What this does is this really sets off Jackson's followers. They're sitting there thinking that Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams made a deal with each other. That if Clay helped Adams win, that he would make him his Secretary of State. And Secretary of State is kind of a little bit today too considered like a stepping stone position into becoming president. Right? It doesn't always work out like that, but a lot of times people who have been Secretary of State will also run for president. So Henry Clay's like, anything I can do to like become president later on, you know, possibly I'll do that. Right. So this whole thing here with Adams naming Clay as his Secretary of State really looked fishy, especially to Jackson's supporters. Everybody following? Right. This is known as the corrupt bargain. And we'll refer to that on another slide as well. But Jackson's followers, they're really upset. They said Clay was corrupt. They said John Quincy Adams was corrupt. So basically, people who won their election and they were Jackson's supporters, anytime Adams wanted to do anything as president, they basically voted the opposite. So John Quincy Adams really didn't get much accomplished in as president. So they just made his presidency very hard for him because they really felt like Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams unfairly took the election from Jackson. Everybody with me? Questions on that? Okay. It's crazy like reading back through this, how there's like a lot of parallels to our most recent election. I feel like people like the fairness and things like that. It's just kind of crazy to me because there's a lot of the same sentiments from both sides, from John Quincy Adams and Jackson, with President Biden and President Trump's sides of of that election. So it's just interesting to think about. Here's how the House of Representatives votes. So John Quincy Adams is that like peachy color. Jackson is the green, and William H. Crawford is the blue. So each state gets one vote. And at that point, what is that? Math is hard. 24 states is what we have at that point. So those were the states that had a vote in the election. So John Quincy Adams wins. No one ever finds any kind of evidence that Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams were like scheming to, to get him elected as president in the House. But there's just that cloud of suspicion that hung over John Quincy Adams' presidency. So not a lot of people took him serious as president because of those allegations of that corrupt bargain. And remember, that corrupt bargain was a lot of people felt like John Quincy Adams was like, hey, if you do this for me, Henry Clay, I'll do this for you, kind of deal. As president, though, his first message to Congress was that Adams wanted improvements to roads and waterways. So rivers and canals are within that as well. So going along with what was happening that we talked about in the last module, expanding transportation, making it easier to move goods and people, Adams wanted to continue that as well. He also wanted to build a national university for scientific research. The Adams, I was about to say this, and it sounds funny, the Adams family, but not the like creepy one, right? But you guys know the Adams family, you know what I'm talking about?
No.
You don't?
Which one?
The Adams family, like the movies, the Adams family? Okay.
I'll probably do. What is it?
It's like the creepy family, like the Hands That Walks, Uncle Fester. No? Okay. It's fine. Look it up. Classics. Okay. Anyway, but John Quincy Adams, he came from a family where education was valued. And so he wanted to build that national university for research, but that was not approved by Congress. Congress only approved funds for improving those rivers, harbors, roads, canals, those types of things. So he did help with transportation, which would in turn help the economy, but that was not approved. The university was not approved by Congress. That's pretty much all John Quincy Adams does as president. It's not really a whole lot to talk about. Because again, he wasn't taken as seriously because of the allegations of the corrupt bargain. So we're going to fast forward 4 years to the election of 1828. In those 4 years, between 1824 and 1828, the Democratic Republican Party splits. Those people who were supporters of Andrew Jackson, who is running again in 1828, they called themselves Democrats. And this is where the Democratic Party that we have today, this is where it begins. Okay, but the platform and views of the party have really changed since it began in 1828. So don't look at this today and go, oh, that's what the Democratic Party today thinks, because it's not necessarily true on most things. Okay, but when the Democratic Party began, they were in favor of states' rights and a less powerful federal government. Right, so they wanted the states to have more say. Andrew Jackson, whenever he was campaigning and running in 1828, he ran on this idea that he basically wanted to deflate the federal government. He felt like it had gotten too big, that it had too much power. So he kind of wanted to like shrink it down a little bit and bring more power in for the states. Does that make sense to everybody? You with me? Okay. Your non-Jackson supporters, they were called National Republicans. That should all be underlined and red, so I apologize for that there. So they were called National Republicans, and they wanted a stronger central government. Today, and again, whenever you're thinking about political parties, it's not like a right or wrong. It's just how you personally feel about things. But today, you look at the Democratic Party, and they favor more power to the federal government today. So it's kind of like that part has flip-flopped from when they first were formed. Your National Republicans, they wanted a strong central government. The National Republicans, this party doesn't really stick around for a very long time, right? So don't get too attached to that party, all right? Your candidates, this was your first election in 1828, the first election where mudslinging happens. What's mudslinging? I know you talked about it in civics. Go ahead, Brianna.
It's like where you're trying to make the other comment bad from women.
Yeah, so basically you do anything you can to make the other person look bad so that more people will vote for you, right? So this is the first time, 1828, that this is used. Is mudslinging still used today?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we're going to watch a video. It's like 4.5 minutes long. There's a guy in the video, and it's older, but you'll get the gist of what they're in 1828, what mudslinging looks like then. But there's a historian in there that says this was the worst election in history with mudslinging. And I'm like, this was pre-2016, pre-2020.
In 1828, John Quincy Adams ran for a second term.
Can y'all hear that at home?
But once again, Andrew Jackson stood in.
Yes, ma'am.
In this election, American political opinion was sharply split. Those for Adams, who believed he deserved 4 more years, and those for Jackson, who believed their men had been robbed in 1824, the victim of the corrupt bargain.
The one person who believed the charges absolutely utterly was Andrew Jackson himself, and he went home swearing eternal revenge, and he got it.
The election of 1828 was the dirtiest campaign in history. I don't think any question about that. It was brutal.
Jackson campaigned on his impressive war record. He was the hero of New Orleans, the conqueror of Florida, and a bona fide veteran of the American Revolution. But Jackson's past also included some unsavory behavior, which the Adams camp brazenly exposed.
They accused him of being a gambler, a military tyrant. John Quincy Adams called him a barbarian.
In this contentious election, character was the main issue.
The people on each side did everything they could to smear the character of the other man.
And in the case of Andrew Jackson, they are really beyond the pale. They attack Jackson, and they attack his wife, Rachel. And the attacks on Rachel Jackson are really merciless.
The dirt on Rachel was that she had married Jackson in 1791 before obtaining a legal divorce from a previous marriage. The charge was true, but so old that no one expected it to be an issue. But then, in the heat of the campaign, a Cincinnati newspaper published the damning story.
When that Cincinnati editor exposed the details of the fact that Rachel had lived in bigamy and that Andrew had lived in sin, you know that it tore his soul. He blamed Henry Clay for that. Henry Clay was a close friend of the editor. While Clay denied it, Jackson never believed the denial. He despised Clay for the corrupt bargain, but came to despise him even more because of that attack on his wife.
The Jackson people responded with equally outrageous charges against Adams.
They would reply that he lived with his wife before they were married. He provided a young American virgin for the pleasure of a Russian czar. He bought a pool table for gambling devices, broke the Sabbath.
Important issues concerning government were ignored. Instead, campaign rhetoric focused on the personal lives and character flaws of the candidates.
Sound familiar?
What kind of a human
Today?
being do you want to be in the White House? Do you want somebody whose wife is a whore, which is essentially what they accused
Mrs. Jackson up there? Or do you want somebody who pimped for the Tsar of Russia, which is what they said that Adams had done?
I have to say this. The things that the Adams people said about Jackson were mainly true. The things that the Jackson people said about Adams were lies.
In this election, the truth hardly mattered. Jackson's popularity with the common man proved to be overwhelming, and he won in a landslide. But the joy of victory didn't last. In December 1828, after buying her inaugural gown, Rachel Jackson died suddenly of a heart attack. She was 61 years old. This was a cruel blow to Jackson, and it would shape his presidency.
Andrew Jackson is reputed to have remarked on the occasion of her death that she did, in fact, forgive all those who had attacked him personally, but that he would never forgive those who had attacked his wife.
Okay. Nope. So that was mudslinging in 1828. How dare you have a pool table? How dare you, you gambler, right? How dare you work on Sunday, right? Religion played a really big role in most people's lives during this time period. So that's why those two things were kind of at the forefront. The biggest thing on the side of Jackson, like the video said, was that his wife technically didn't get divorced before he married her, but it was so long before they got married that nobody really felt like it was a big deal. But again, religion playing a big role, one being divorced, and two, like getting married before you are divorced would have been a really taboo or not okay thing to do in the 1820s. They also, and then Jackson's camp, what they said about Adams was basically that he was finding prostitutes for Russian leaders to have. So there's that. So again, like the guy said, so most of what Jackson said about Adams wasn't true, but most of the things about Jackson were true. Catherine.
So basically, Rachel was like still married. She's like, oh, I'm just gonna move in with you.
So you'd have to go and read more on the story. She had not been like living with her first husband for a really long time. They just legally it didn't happen. Like on paper it didn't happen, but like in every other sense of, you know, emotionally, like they were like I said, religion played a really big role, and like getting divorced, like in the Bible, getting divorced, you don't get divorced, right? Today, like it's not as big of a thing. It's kind of normal in our society if people, you know, get divorced. You either know someone or maybe your parents are, or whatever. But in the 1820s, it was like super taboo. Like you didn't get divorced. Like you were like socially, like almost socially unaccepted if you got divorced. Yeah. Like you wouldn't be invited to parties or different things like that. I know, right? Right. You can just go hang out with all the people who own pool tables and like live your life, right? No. So mudslinging, again, used for the first time in the 1820s. A lot of those things, like name calling, like did Jackson call Adams a barbarian? Is that what the video said? I can't remember. Whatever. But how dare they call them a barbarian, right? Again, difference between the 1800s and the 21st century. This was also the first time that they used buttons and slogans and had like rallies where people would come and show support for the candidates. And pretty much it's been used in every election since 1828. Good there? Yep. Yeah. Okay. So with the election of 1828, the Democrats, they nominate, obviously, Andrew Jackson. He wants to kind of make up for the 1824 election that he felt like was taken from him. Jackson himself, he's from Tennessee, so he's from the West. And he gets, in the West, he gets the most votes. His kind of running mate, the other candidate that the Democrats nominate, that they hope will come in second, is John C. Calhoun. You guys remember him? Right? He was technically the leader where? The South, right? And so by kind of teaming up with Jackson, they would have those two regions, the West and the South. And so the Southern states would vote hopefully for Jackson and John C. Calhoun. So the Southern states supported Calhoun, who supported Jackson, so that would help him. And Jackson received the most votes in that region as well. So the election of 1828, a very different story than the election of 1824. Jackson wins 178 electoral votes. Adams gets 83. And clearly Jackson is the winner. And officially, after Jackson is elected, this is when the Democratic Party is formed. And this was the first election where the Democrats had a candidate win, and that party still exists today. Good here? Yeah. So here's what your results look like for the election. Again, the electoral vote, very different than the other one. The popular vote was a lot closer, but again, the electoral vote is the one. Our electoral college is the group that elects the president. So that is where we see the biggest difference between the two candidates. Everybody good? Okay, so Andrew Jackson, he was pretty well liked by a lot of people. He had qualities that a lot of Americans liked. He was a patriot, had a lot of national pride and loyalty to the country. He was a self-made man. He didn't come from a wealthy family like a lot of our previous presidents had. And so he had kind of worked his way up from nothing to get to the office of president. And him being a war hero also helped with that too. So his reputation as a person was very likable by a lot of Americans because they were able to kind of see themselves in Andrew Jackson, because most Americans were not rich, didn't have an opportunity for education and things like that. So a lot of people found the same qualities in Andrew Jackson that they found in themselves. Catherine? We're not quite there yet. Yeah. And I see what you're saying with that. It was very normal for, racism was normalized. It was pretty much a part of every day. So, but we'll get to that in the next module. We're not quite there yet. Yeah. But everybody was like, yeah, he was super likable by the voters. You with me? By the people who could vote, right? And the rest of America, because they're like, oh yeah, like just similarities there. Fun fact about Jackson's inauguration, there's like a inaugural ball where a lot of important people are invited. It's like you have the inauguration during the day and then you have like a celebration at night. Andrew Jackson like kind of sent out like an open letter, like in newspapers and stuff like that, that invited just anyone could come to the party. And people just like showed up and got drunk and almost like destroyed the White House. So that's fun. But he just opened the party up to anybody, and that's not normally like what happens. So, but Andrew Jackson did that. Just a fun fact about that. Okay. While he was running for president, Andrew Jackson promised a few different things. He wanted to expand rights. He wanted basically one of the one of the biggest things he did was expand voting, not by much. but he did expand voting to all white men. Meaning, previous to that, you could only vote if you were a white man that what? Owned land. So now, if you were a white man, you could vote. Who still could not vote, women, African Americans, Native Americans still could not vote. There were very few states at this point that would allow women to vote, but again, only in like local elections. Federally, women were not allowed to vote like in federal elections, national elections. Rick?
Were Native Americans enslaved?
Depended on where they were. We're going to talk more about them in the next module.
Okay.
But it just kind of depended on the area. Yeah. Good here? Okay. So voting was expanded just a little though. Another thing that Jackson wanted to do is he wanted to stop what was called bureaucracy in the federal government, where basically the same people, like same small group of people, controlled things over and over and over. So when he became president, he utilized something that we now call the spoil system, where he became president. He basically fired everyone in positions that he didn't want them in and hired his own people for those positions. Right. So we kind of see this today, not that people are fired, but it's understood that when a new president comes in, they're going to kind of like clean house and bring in their own people to do specific jobs, right? The president gets to choose their cabinet. So, you know, like if the president you worked for previously didn't get reelected or today their term is up, you know that you're probably not going to have that job. But the difference here is, bless you. The difference here is Jackson fires people and then he only hires people who will support him so that he can benefit from them helping. If they choose not to support him, then they get booted and he'll put somebody else in there. Right. So that's kind of known as the spoil system, which Jackson basically accused Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams of doing with this corrupt bargain. Right. And then he kind of just comes in and does that for himself. Jackson also starts nominating conventions, and this gave people more of an opportunity to participate in selecting who the candidates would be for president for their political party. We still have these today. Our two main political parties are the Republicans and the Democrats, right? In an election year, normal non-pandemic election year, you would have had, I mean, we still kind of have these on like a smaller scale, but you have the they call them the DNC and the RNC, the Democratic National Convention and the Republican National Convention. You guys know what I'm talking about? So it's essentially all that is like a huge pep rally for the political party, where at the end they announce like who their candidate for president's going to be. They basically already know at that point who it's going to be, but it's just a big pep rally to like pump everybody up for the campaign. And usually that happens in the summertime. And then really from like summer until November, that's when the candidates really go out and campaign. So Jackson started those in the 1820s, and that's something that we still use today. They're televised today, so even if you don't go or can't go, you still get to watch it. People within the party give speeches and such. Good? All right, last couple of slides. In our last module, we talked about tariffs that were put into place in the late 1800s or late 18-teens, early 1820s. And we know the northern states supported it because it made foreign goods more expensive. So people would buy the American goods that were being made by the northern states. The southern states, we know, did not support it because they traded more with those European countries, and now it was more expensive for them to do that, so the South wasn't making as much money. Jackson in 1828, he wins the presidency, and his vice president is the other Democratic nominee, who was John C. Calhoun, who, remember, was the leader of the South. How did the South feel about the tariffs? They didn't like them, right? So John C. Calhoun is like, this is going to be great because the South can now kind of do more what they want. The southern states can kind of make their decisions about these tariffs because as Democrats, we support more state power. So Calhoun said to the southern states, hey, you know those tariffs that were put into place? You can nullify those. Meaning, what does it mean, nullify? Yeah, get rid of or not follow, essentially. You don't have to follow those tariffs if you don't want to. Andrew Jackson goes, whoa, whoa, whoa. You can't tell the states to do that. The states need to follow those tariffs because it's federal law. Does everybody remember the platform of the Democratic Party in 1828? Which group did they support having more power? The states. Is Jackson supporting more power for the states here? He's not. Once Jackson gets into office, his view kind of flips. Maybe not intentional. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but he basically disagrees with Calhoun and is like, nope, states have to follow federal law, and I'm going to enforce that. You also had Kentucky that, and we'll get back to this tariff debate in just a second. At the same time, dealing with states' rights versus federal rights, Kentucky wanted the federal government to fund the building of a road, the construction of a road, and Jackson rejects that bill, rejects that request because he felt it only helped Kentucky and not the whole nation. So he wanted those things to only benefit everyone. He wanted them to benefit everyone, not just a single state. So a lot of people like looked at the tariffs and looked at the Maysville Road bill, and they're like, wait a second, we thought you supported states' rights. We're not so sure about that now. So things are kind of shifting here, but a lot of people still supported Jackson. And we'll get to more things that he did in the next lesson. Good here? All right, last slide. In December of 1832, in response to Jackson saying that the southern states had to follow those tariffs, had to comply with those tariffs, South Carolina passes something called the Nullification Act. The Nullification Act, in short, basically says, South Carolina says they are not going to follow or pay these illegal tariffs. They basically said that the federal government put these tariffs in place without consulting them as a state. And so they said they're illegal and they're not going to follow them. And if the federal government tried to interfere with their trading, that they would secede. What does that mean? Leave, break away. They're like, we're not going to follow the tariffs. And if you try to tell us otherwise, then peace out. We're not going to be a part of the United States anymore. President Jackson hears this and he's like, oh, nope, that's not going to happen. So South Carolina is basically like flexing their muscles right now. And Jackson's like, well, I have bigger muscles. And so he comes back in March of 1833 with something called the Force Bill. And what the Force Bill said was essentially, Jackson says he can use military force to make sure states follow federal law if he needs to. So Jackson's like, okay, go ahead and not follow those tariffs, but I'm going to send in the military and make you follow the tariffs. And so South Carolina like unflexes their muscles. And they say, okay, fine, we'll follow the tariff, but we nullify the Force Bill. Basically, you can't, that's not what the military is for. You can't use military force to make us do something we don't want to do. Even though, like, technically he kind of did. without having to send in the military. So let's kind of compare this to another situation that is kind of similar with George Washington. You guys remember the Whiskey Rebellion when Miss Campbell was here, right? In the Whiskey Rebellion, remember you had farmers that didn't want to pay the tax on whiskey. And so they started like burning down buildings and harming the tax collectors and things like that. What does George Washington do? He sends in the military, right? To put down what George Washington considered to be a riot, essentially, right? George Washington says, it's okay to not like a tax, but you can't what? You can't protest it violently, right? You can protest all you want as long as it's peaceful, says which amendment? The first, right? Washington's like, hey, remember that thing called the Constitution that we have now, right? We should probably follow that or it's a worthless piece of paper, right? So that's what he does when he's sending in the government. A lot of people did not agree with Washington's decision to send in the government. To send in the military. Is Jackson justified in threatening to send in the military here?
Yes.
They're not violently protesting, are they? Is it necessary to use military force? Probably not. There's probably another way to go about it, right? But in Jackson's mind, he's like, the law of the land is, what we say in the federal government, technically the Constitution, right? And the tariffs technically weren't a part of the Constitution. They were just kind of like, they were that tax that was put into place for whatever period of time. So some people say that he was not justified in using military force. Other people are like, well, if states aren't going to comply, what else can you do? So it really there's no right answer to that question. So it really just kind of depends on how you feel. And in terms of Washington, he was defending the Constitution, so he felt like it was the right thing to do. Again, is it right or wrong? Don't know. I personally see more justification for Washington's side, but there might be some personal bias in here against Andrew Jackson. But it wasn't a violent protest, but they still weren't following the rules. But again, should states have more power? Should they not have more power? If a state, Sarah said, can a state secede if they want to today? They can. You don't have to be a part of the United States if you don't want to. It probably won't happen anytime soon, but they could if they wanted to.
How do they decide that?
The state government would.
So like the people don't really know.
So there's been in recent years, there's been lots of states that are like, we're going to secede. Like California has said it, Texas has said it. Maybe even Florida has said it. Oh, I was like, where is that? That's coming from Miss Warfel's room. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's what we were just talking about, Sarah. I think in recent years, Texas said something. I think Texas was like kind of starting the process in recent years, but that's fallen off. Like that's not really like a thing anymore. You would have to have like a special like convention, and it would be like, it's a lot more work than maybe it would be worth. I don't know. But I guess if you had the right cause, it would be worth it, right?